Hey, Shalom Akim, Shabbat Shalom, giving all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh, Bashim Yahushai, Bashim Makakwadash, the honors to the apostles and elders of great millstone for teaching us his truth and salutations to the sincere Akim and Akwathim. Listen, may the blessing of election be upon your house. My name is Raquai. I'm back in here with another quick and Lord's will, as always, an edifying lesson. And for today's lesson, I wanted to talk about sex and basically the Sabbath and how the Sabbath is basically holy, and sex basically is an activity that is is unclean, right? And there are some of our people that that do that, that teach that, and I wanted to kind of go through some precepts, and Lord's will, this would be basically an edifying lesson, right? Because the Sabbath basically was supposed to be a day that's supposed to be essentially holy days, consecrated, right? So I pulled up the definition of the word holy, and it says here divine, sacred, to be revered or worshipped. It says consecrated, so basically with something that is sacred, sacred, godly. It says perfect in religious character and practice of devotion, ecclesiastical. It says hallow, right? Let's see. That must be preserved whole or intact and then cannot be transgressed or violated. So within our culture, we have days that are, holy days, and then we have like high holy days, right? So I'll start off with this precept here. And it says here, this is Sirach chapter 33. I'll start at verse 8, and it says, by the knowledge of the Lord, Yahweh Bashim Yahushai, they were distinguished, and he altered seasons and feasts, and some of them he hath made high days and hallowed them, right? So going back to that word holy, where does it say here? Let's get the word holy. It says hallow, it says somebody, a holy person, right? To make holy, sanctify, to honor as holy, consecrate, ordain, right? So these things are basically set apart. Continuing on in verse 9, it says, and hallowed them, and some of them he had made ordinary days, right? So when you read and go through, for example, in the Torah and Leviticus, it outlines basically different high holy days that you find within our culture, right? You have the feast of first fruits, you have the feast of unleavened bread, and then you have the Sabbath and other feast days and high holy days, right? So those are the days that are supposed to be basically Day of Atonement. That's another one as well. Those are days within our culture, within the Israelite culture, that is supposed to be reverenced, in terms of bringing back remembrance, in terms of what the Lord, basically did for us, and reminding us that we are basically a holy people unto the Lord, right? You're set apart to be especially a special people above all these other nations, pursuant to Deuteronomy, the 7th chapter, right? So that being said, this is one of those things that makes, speaking of sex specifically, it is one of those activities that can make you unclean, right? So, when camps basically teach that, you're becoming unclean, right? That is something within your control that you can do, or I should say, you can refrain from doing, in the confines within the days that fall upon the Sabbath. Basically, the Sabbath falls on those particular days. Those are things, that is something that's within your control, right? So just to show that the Sabbath is I'm sorry, the sex is an unclean activity, right? Let me go here. This is Leviticus chapter 15. And the title here, it says cleansing unhealthiness. So in this chapter specifically, it goes into the discharge of different bodily fluids, right? So one of the examples of a bodily fluid is basically semen. For women, you have that cycle, every time, of the month, right? Those are different examples of bodily discharges that makes you basically unclean, right? So I wanted to read this here. This is Leviticus chapter 15, verse 15 here. And it says here, hold on. Okay, I'll start at verse 16. And it says, and if any man's seed, as a matter of fact, hold on. I'll just read verse 2 actually. Leviticus chapter 15, I'll start at verse 1. And it says, the Lord Yahweh, Bashim Shai, spake unto Moses and Aaron, saying, speak unto the children of Israel, and say unto them, when a man hath a running issue out of his flesh, because of his issue he is unclean, right? And then I want to jump down to verse 16 here, and it says, and if any man's seed of copulation go out from him, then he shall wash all his flesh with water, and be unclean until the evening. And every garment on every skin whereon the seed, where is the seed of copulation, shall be washed with water, and be unclean until the evening. And the woman also with whom that man shall lie with, seed of copulation, they both bathe themselves. They shall both bathe themselves with water, and be unclean until the evening. Right. So, excuse me. Let me get that word for what's it called? Copulation. Just for edification. Okay, so I got it in the etymology here, and it says the coupling, the joining, the uniting. It says connecting. It says to join together, couple, bind, link, unite, tie, link. In specific sense, sexual intercourse. So that's how you join together. That's the original way. That's how what's it called? Marriage is solidified. When you join together with a woman, you join together through the activity of sex, and that's how you become. That's what solidifies marriage, right? So, for example, what's it called? I think it was Isaac, if I'm not mistaken. He went into Rebecca's tent, and he went in unto her, and then she essentially, after they had sex, she became Isaac's wife, right? So the point is, this is one of the activities that one not just makes you unclean, but that's what solidifies marriage, right? So let me get this. Let me see if I can find this right here real quick. 1 second. Okay, so the Hebrew word here is shaka ba, right, for copulation. It says here, carnally copulation, lay seed, right? The act of line of sexual relations, right? So, that's what happens when you have sexual relations, you know, with a woman, right? Seed of copulation. You shoot your seed, your sperm into her, and eventually that seed is nurtured, and what comes forth, and it brings forth children, right? So that is one of the things that makes you unclean, right? So that is something to refrain from, you know, when it comes to the Sabbath, right? I believe also this regulation was for the priest as well. Let me see if I can find that. Because the priests were supposed to be, when they would serve, they had to remain holy. They had to remain consecrated. They had to be, basically set apart, right? So let me find that. Just bear with me 1 second. They couldn't be serving, you know, in a tabernacle, and then they profane themselves. So that was one of the things that can profane yourself, right? When you do that. This is Leviticus chapter 22. I'll start at verse 1, and I'm going to jump down to, where's the point? Okay, verse 4 is the point. Okay, I'll just read down. And it says here, sundry rules for the priests. And it says, and the Lord Yahweh spake unto Moses, saying, speak unto Aaron and his sons, that they may separate themselves from the holy things of the children of Israel, that they profane not my holy name in those things which are hollow unto me, right? So just like we read about earlier, those things are set apart, right? That's what the word hollow means. I am the Lord Yahweh Bashem Shai. And it says here, say unto them, whosoever he be of all your seed among your generations, that goeth unto the holy things which the children of Israel hallow unto the Lord, having his uncleanness upon him, ye shall be cut off from my presence, for I am the Lord. What man soever of the seed of Aaron is a leper, or hath a running issue, shall not eat of the holy things until he be clean. And whosoever toucheth anything that is unclean by the dead, or here's the point, a man whose seed his seed goeth from him, right? So when you shoot your seed, out, that bodily discharge, that sperm into a woman, that makes you, basically it makes you unclean, right? Verse 5, and it says, whosoever toucheth any creeping thing whereby he may be made unclean, or a man for whom he may take uncleanness, whatsoever uncleanness he hath, the soul which hath touched any such shall be unclean until even. He shall not eat of the most holy things unless he wash his flesh with water, right? So he had to basically, he can't eat of certain holy things, right? So basically, the children, the priests, they had their own provisions. They would have the different, like the showbread, they would have like their own, they had the best oil and wine. They got certain portions of different sacrifices, like peace offerings, and different kinds of offerings, basically, right? So they couldn't eat of those most holy things, right? If you're basically if you're profaning yourself through these different activities, right? So seed coming out of you was one of those different examples. Just to kind of like tie things all together. So basically, sex, it makes you unclean, right? So that is an activity basically to refrain yourself from, right? Just to show you another quick example here. 1 Samuel chapter 21. I'll start at verse 1, and it says that came came David to Nob to Ahimelech the priest. And Ahimelech was afraid of at the meeting of David, and said unto him, Why art thou alone, and no man with thee? Because David was on the run, right? He was being sought after by Saul. And it says, And David said to Ahimelech the priest, The king hath commanded me a business, that he said unto me, Let no man know anything of the business whereabout I send thee. And what I have commanded thee, I have appointed my servants to such a place. And it says, Now therefore, what is in thy hand, give me 5 loaves of bread in my hand, or what there is present. And the priest answered David and said, There is no common bread under mine hand, but there is hallowed bread, right? So just like I said before, hallowed, sacred, holy, set apart. This was the specific showbread that the priest would eat, right? And it says here, if the young men have kept themselves at least from women, right? I wanted to get that in another translation. Let me see if I could find that. It says kept themselves. And it says, And David answered, and the priest answered David, There is no ordinary unconsecrated bread on hand, but there is consecrated bread. You may have it only if your young men have kept themselves from women. I'm reading in the Amplified. And verse 5, and it says, And David answered the priest, Be assured that women have been kept from us. Women have been kept from us in the 3 days since I set out, and the bodies of the young men were consecrated, so ceremonial clean. And although it was ordinary, unconsecrated journey, so how much more will their vessels be holy today, right? So the priest basically gave him the consecrated bread, to eat, right? So it shows that he had to find out, as long as you kept yourselves from women, you can eat this, right? So it shows you couldn't be serving. The priests knew about their sundry laws. They knew about their the things that they couldn't do while they were serving, right, in the tabernacle, right? So and one of those things was if you can't eat of these specific holy things, if you were coming on to women, right? So just to show that sex was something that basically it profanes you, it defiles you, right? It makes you unclean, so to speak, right? But that being said, I wanted to just say this real quick, because there are some things, because we're in captivity and we're subject to payments, so you have to you have to make ends meet, right? So this whole account here of David eating the showbread is very spiritual too, right? Because it also exemplifies situations where for us, Lord's will, Lord has mercy upon us. We will be in situations where, we can't keep the laws 100%. But to go back to the main point, that sex is something to refrain from, during the time of the Sabbath, because that's something you can control, right? But, a lot of us, we don't have, the means to, you don't want to be over righteous over much when it comes to working and stuff like that. But to go back to the point, sex is just something that makes you unclean and profanes the Sabbath, right? So, I just wanted to basically, just read that, because some of our other camps, they teach that you can have sex on the Sabbath, which basically, it doesn't promote a mentality of discipline, right? Like, to think about the type of culture that Babylon pushes. It pushes an over sexualized culture, right? It doesn't push abstinence, self-control, holiness, or actually abstaining. You know what I'm saying? And when you abstain from a lot of these things, you become a lot more useful to the Lord, right? Because your mind is not constantly on that sex drive, right, to think about that all the time, right? I guess I'll just end off with this last precept, 2 Timothy 2. This is 2 Timothy 2 and 21. And it says, if a man purge himself of these, he shall be a vessel unto honor, sanctified and meet for the master's use, and for every and prepared, unto every good work, right? So, that exemplifying that, you tend to make yourself more holy, right? You actually try to follow after righteousness, and you're not on a low vibration in comparison to the rest of our people, because we're really and truly supposed to be, a holy people, a separate people. But our people, like it says in Jeremiah, the second chapter, we're supposed to be nobles, but we become a bunch of degenerate plants of a strange vine. So what happens is, when you're in a culture that constantly pushes, live it up, do what you want, it's not a culture that basically pushes abstinence and restraint. It basically just constantly is all about feeding the flesh, right? So, refraining from sexual activity on the Sabbath is very, very important, right? And abstaining yourself and actually meditating upon, good things, and basically, our history and so on and so forth, right? So just wanted to actually, just discuss this real quick, but Lord's will, this lesson was just quick and edifying. Just like to give all praises, glory, and honor to Yahweh Bashim El Shai. Until next time, I say Shalom.